I could invite all 5 presenters to come up to the front, and I'd invite questions that might sort of be general for any of the presenters that tie things together, or if you have follow-up questions that are specific to a particular presenter, or comments, or discussion. I'll open it up. Yeah.
Thank you to all. Your presentations were wonderful. I love hearing those insights about when you had an aha moment in your research and it kind of took a different direction. It sounds like we just heard of one. I'm wondering if anybody else would like to share a story of like a big moment when you were like, this is what it's all about. Like, I would just love to hear any of those stories if you have them.
I think all of us have that.
The question was if any of us, like, what was our aha moment in research, like as we've been doing research. Genuinely, mine was when I got to read Foucault. I was like, oh, so power is why we do everything. Sounds good. And then I left. But I think that, like, that changed me. That changed how I approached, because I was a history major in my undergrad. It changed how I saw even events in history that I knew. It changed how I looked back on myself, like even in my example. It just changed all of it. So for me, it was like that. I only want to talk about language. Language is powerful. Language is why we do what we do. So I guess mine's kind of easy because it's Foucault. So.
So mine was actually the interview with my mother that I mentioned. I was already like a year and a half into the program, and I'm going part-time, so this is my 4th year. But I was going kind of a totally different route. And I started out wanting to talk or research and just think about pop culture that they're not teens anymore, but I have 2 teenage kids who, like, they'd show me like videos and play me songs and tell me all these things about all this stuff, and I was always like, wow, I'm so out of touch. But it was, it was really making me think a lot. So I was doing that, and then I did this interview with my mother, and it was a complete, really deeply personal, and just like definitely one of those aha moments that made me say, oh my gosh, am I crazy? But I think I want to totally change directions. And I did.
Mine was a long time in the making. There were lots of little things along the way, but I would say that it came to a head when I was getting ready to quit my program, for more reasons than one. But I was feeling this feeling of this wasn't fun when I did it the first time, so why am I doing it now? And why do I really think I want to go do it again and get a PhD? I'm crazy. I'm a sadist. Like, what's wrong with me? And then I realized, this is the research. This is what you talk about because this is what you know. And that is a question that keeps you up at night. Am I going to keep doing this? And if I am, why? And why does everybody else do it too?
It's interesting because for me, just being in the cohort with a lot of you or seeing projects change, I feel like mine has really stayed, the topic has stayed the same. I knew I was interested in studying desegregation and complicating the thinking around desegregation. I think the aha for me was the same class that you mentioned, Erica. It was an oral history class. And I wanted to seek out opportunities I was thinking of doing a thesis more nationally looking at desegregation, but it really was like the aha of how little has been written about Tacoma's history. And I had just always thought that it was there, I just hadn't read it yet. And then seeking out people to do this oral history with, finding that some of the big leaders, so Alex Sergenko was the assistant superintendent under Giadroni when desegregation really started to happen, and our class was like in March, and he had passed away like 2 weeks before. We had to find our subjects, and I was like looking to contact him. So just recognizing that like the time we're in, a lot of people who hold those stories, students who went through these desegregated schools, and that's also not what I focused on, but just recognizing this sense of urgency. The other moment for me was just learning about YPAR, like recognizing there's a method to this, like working with youth and centering their voice like is a method of research, and that made it more inspiring to me than just the history part.
Other questions, comments? Yes, please.
My question is for Tiana, did I say it correctly? Yep. Okay. I was curious more about the intersectionality of race and gender. I noticed that the women that you spoke with were pretty young and new to the university, if you were like their first or second year. I was wondering if they were aware of the intersectionality and or if you speaking with them about it helped them with this feeling of like lack of belonging.
Sure. The question is, to summarize, how intersectionality came into play in the study. Is that fair? Okay. So what you saw on the slide was really a condensed version of all the demographics of them. One of them actually has already graduated, so she's young, but she finished. One of them is a divorcee. One of them had been to 3 schools before this, so they had a lot of different experiences, even though they were young. And as far as intersectionality goes, I was really pleased, not surprised, but just pleased that all 4 of them were aware of it. And then they also had other parts of their identity, like one of them has a disability, 2 of them are part of the LGBTQ community, and a few of them are immigrants or like first generation or immigrants themselves. And they brought up on their own how all of those different parts of their identity intersect with each other and their race and their gender and really complicate their experience. And intersectionality is also a framework that I use in the analysis of the study. So, I mean, it's in the thesis. It's not something I was able to talk about tonight, but to answer your question, yes, it is there and they are aware of it. And I would just say that I think for them, the thing that came out the most was, I already know that I'm brown, and I already know that I'm a woman, but when you put those 2 things together, I feel like even more removed, especially the people who were in the math and sciences. They just felt even more like, I don't belong here. So, yeah, thanks for your question.
I have a question for you as well. How did you go about picking your participants? Like, how are these people you know?
So, somewhat. One of the people was someone who introduced themselves to me when I was in the field. It was just kind of a happenstance sort of thing. She'd seen me around campus. That was one of the days that I had my kid, and she came over to tell me, oh, your kid's so cute. And then I was like, okay, so do you go to school here? Are you an undergrad? You want to do this research? You know, that kind of thing. Another one of the participants, she was recommended to me by my mentor. My mentor knew about my study and said, oh, here's a student you could reach out to. So I just emailed her. And then the other 2 actually were in a class with me. And I didn't want to complicate kind of like that situation. So I waited until the class was over to ask them if they were willing to participate. And they said yes. So they weren't people who I knew that much, because being a mom and a student, and prior to that I was working, I was never here. I don't know undergraduates. So it was a lot of kind of like opportune meetings.
I think we can take time for one more question, general question or comment, then we'll move to the poster sessions and mingling, and we can continue the conversation in that setting. One last question or comment for the group, or for any particular member of the group? Go ahead.
I was curious for each of you. I really was impressed by the interdisciplinary focus that you had. Many of you were drawing from very different areas of type methodologies. And I was just curious how you find support for that. Are you able to reach out to people from different disciplines to sort of help with your projects, or are there barriers that you encountered in trying to do that?
Sorry.
So I feel really lucky to actually have co-chairs. I think that is also kind of unique. And so my, coming in wanting to study desegregation and education being, my background. My undergraduate degree was in journalism, so I kind of brought that. But it's in SAIS, there's no one with really a strong education background, so everyone was referring me to people outside. And so I think having co-chairs and the graduate school being supportive of that, not at first, but ultimately yes. And we're an interdisciplinary program, so it makes sense to have different perspectives, not just as readers, but people really guiding. And I think that's overall strengthened definitely my thesis, and I was introduced to YPAR through both of my chairs because it's part of their work. So it's interesting to even find those connections within or between different schools here.
I think that there's not another like group of students that would like. We have paved some sort of way for us in our own program in, I would say, like positive ways for hopefully like future students. So it's kind of a unique question that you ask because we're probably all going to be really PC about it, but we did find different barriers of topics and like a professor not being available or not having a professor. Me in particular, I kind of just count myself lucky in a sense because I took our graduate writing course and our professor is a rhetorician. So like for me, I didn't know that that really existed until I had my class with him. And then I realized like I do this all the time. I do this every day. Like these are the questions I ask. This is what's important to me. So it kind of just unfolded that way for me. But yeah, I'll let others speak to other barriers or their experiences. So.
Well, my story is different. I don't think that I was really lucky. I had fewer barriers. You know, my chair is pushy. I'm stubborn, so I go and get what I want.
I had fewer barriers too because I work here. And I've worked here for a while, and I already know a lot of faculty, and I don't know everybody, but you know, so between that and just sort of the classes I've taken along the way in this program, had opportune, chances to meet, a few that I didn't know, and as things kind of shifted and changed, I just was able to, fairly easily, since I'm always here every day of the week, figure out a way to do that.
I didn't plan on answering this question, but I guess I would say, I would reiterate what Katie and Alyssa have said, where it's like, yeah, there were some barriers, and yes, maybe at first there wasn't the support that we needed, but we did, like Shadiar said, we just go get what we want, and so we made it work. I would agree that the professor Katie's talking about her chair, he's my chair too. If it wasn't for him saying, I'll be your chair, you go find who you need, and you let me know what I need to do to get them on your team. If it wasn't for that, then I probably would have quit, because I went to his office to quit school that day. So, like I said, if it wasn't for him, then I probably wouldn't be here. And then finding faculty and staff who are really supportive and just saying, even though you have a background in art and you don't know anything about this, we're going to get you what you need. So that's been really great to have them kind of come alongside me and get me through.
Well, with that, please join me in thanking all 5 of these together.